Colonel Wilkerson, I feel like it would be very remiss of me not to start with this question. For those who are watching and listening and not aware, the name I chose for the podcast, Knowns Unknown, is a bit of a riff off of that famous quote by your former colleague and Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, about there being known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, for which I think he got a bit of mockery at the time. So I thought, given your experience in the second Bush administration as Colin Powell's chief of staff, there's probably few people better placed than you are to comment on whether Rumsfeld deserved the mockery that he got or whether he was a misunderstood genius.
Many of my colleagues who worked with Donald Rumsfeld prior to his second term as Secretary of Defense have tried to argue with me that at the time they worked with him, he was a brilliant individual. I usually respond, I didn't work with him at that time. I worked with him at the time that he was the second time as Secretary of Defense. And as far as I'm concerned, he was a real danger to the Republic and to the administration. And the reason I say that is threefold, maybe more than three reasons. The first reason is that he became entirely focused on just what you demonstrated: mimicry, cajolery, riddles, all manner of jargon, bureaucratic jargon in particular, that concentrated on his winning a tactical match, usually with my boss, Colin Powell, but oftentimes with Condi Rice, the National Security Advisor, or indeed with the president himself. And this became his focus. Not a strategic focus, not a utilitarian focus even, but a focus that said, I'm going to get one over on you. And personally, I'm going to get one over on you. I don't care about the bigger issues. And this became all consuming for him, so much so at the end, he didn't even realize that in November 2006, he was going to get fired because he had so neglected the fundamental issues he was confronted with in order to win this bureaucratic battle on a daily basis. And I likened it to his wrestling at Princeton. He was a wrestler. That's what he did. Every time he met my boss, he wanted to throw him on the mat, not deal with the issues, but throw him on the mat. And this really made the bureaucracy, already stymied at many points because of the vice president's power, it really made it even more inefficient. And the second reason is because I don't think he could see past his first secretariat. He simply was buried in that first secretariat, which of course was buried in the Cold War and all the myths and arguments and debates about that Cold War. And he tried to transfer that, when he did think strategically, to the new world, to the new era, to the global war on terror, if you will. And the third reason, he was a liar. He was flat out a liar. I had a lunch. Unbeknownst to me that this guy was going to invite me to lunch. He was 80 years old. Still very lucid. He had worked in Ronald Reagan's White House. He had worked in many White Houses, but he remembered Ronald Reagan's in particular. And he also had worked in Jerry Ford's. And so he was having lunch with me, and I said, I won't mention any names because we swore each other to secrecy, but I said, why did you invite me to lunch? I'd just become chief of staff in August 2002. He said, because I wanted to warn you about the biggest liar in your administration. He would lie and lie and lie and cheat and steal and never blink an eye. I said, whom are you referring to? Donald Rumsfeld, he said. And then he began to describe to me how Rumsfeld had used Jerry Ford's naivete, if you will, until Jerry Ford found out about it and smacked him for it, to get people fired, to include the Secretary of Defense, so he could then move up and become the Secretary of Defense. He also brought Cheney in to be the youngest chief of staff in White House history. Anyway, this guy said, be careful around him because he lies, and he lies, and he will never admit it. So those are the three, and I found that was pretty much true. So those are the three reasons I had, by the time we reached the end in January 2005, absolutely no use for Donald Rumsfeld.
Well, the subject of bureaucracy was really kind of what interested me in speaking to you, given the recent Axios reporting, which I'm sure you're aware of these apparent plans of people surrounding former President Trump, of basically trying to form something like a government in waiting and planning to use an executive order called Schedule F to basically gut what they would call the deep state or the government bureaucracy and just appoint thousands of people who are politically loyal to, in this case, the former president. What was your reaction upon first
Well,
hearing of that?
I saw that with Cheney to a large extent, more so than any president since World War II, and that's my specialty area is World War II forward. We had a patronage program before World War II, no question about that. I mean, Lincoln said one time, very characteristic of Lincoln, there's too many pigs for the tits. And he meant there are too many people coming in trying to get jobs. The civil service was built in the late 1800s, started by Ulysses Grant, of course, to try and do something about that. And I think they largely did, to make the bureaucracy a merit-based service rather than a patronage-based service. What Cheney wanted to do, and what Rumsfeld was his lead man on doing in the Defense Department, was do away with that meritorious service. Largely the civil service, but they also reached out to the professional services within the bureaucracy, like the Foreign Service. And they wanted to start with defense, and that was largely DoD civilians or civil service. And they wanted to get rid of the process of the laborious bureaucratic process of firing those persons. That usually involved an expert in human relations will tell you that it took 2 to 3 years even to get rid of a really bad performer in the civil service, because you had to counsel them multiple times. You had to make sure that the counseling was recorded. You had to have witnesses to what you were doing. You had to have a series of efficiency reports, performance reports that reflected bad performance. One wouldn't do it. You had to have a series of them. So it took a couple of 3 years to fire a person in the civil service. Now, that was part of the intent of this merit-based service, because they didn't want people reaching in, political people, reaching in and saying, I don't like this person, fired, gone, get me a new person. And of course, the new person would agree with them. That was part of the reason for the civil service. So that there were two sides to this coin, that very valid reason for not being easy to fire, and the other objection to when you did find someone that needed firing, it took such a laborious process to do it. So Rumsfeld wanted to obviate all that. I want to hire and fire today. I want to hire him in the morning, fire him in the afternoon, or pat him on the back in the afternoon. And he started a major movement through White House personnel to do that. And most people don't understand the White House Personnel Office is very powerful when it comes to the bureaucracy, especially that part that the president can touch, like Schedule C's, political appointees. Didn't work. I went to meeting after meeting with White House personnel and others where this was being vouchsafed as a course to take, to experiment and so forth. And I kept running into everybody objecting. Everybody, the bureaucrats objected, the Congress objected. Finally, the Congress threw enough impediments in Rumsfeld's way, understanding, I think, that, hey, you don't want to take the civil service and destroy it. And this would be the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak. It would begin to destroy it, and it would spread throughout the rest of the departments and agencies. So the Congress kind of slapped him. They did that periodically with Rumsfeld. He wanted to take over control of nuclear weapons, too. He wanted control of nuclear weapons to be in the hands of his generals. And ultimately, of course, in his hands, because he negated his generals and made them puppets. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was his puppet, for example, General Myers. So the Congress stopped him on that one, and they stopped him quickly on that one, nuclear weapons. And they stopped him eventually on trying to privatize the civil service, if you will. And it didn't go anywhere. But what Richard Cheney did at the end, and I have to believe that Richard Cheney was sort of behind Rumsfeld in this initiative, testing the waters, so to speak. What Cheney did at the end was he took what presidents had done repeatedly since World War II, and more so in the latter presidencies than the former in that period. He took political appointees whom he had appointed, President Bush ostensibly had appointed, like me, for example, and he converted them to civil service at the last minute. And that way they stay in that bureaucracy inside the government, and they are unfireable virtually. As I said, it takes so long to get rid of them. So the new president is saddled with those people. And where are those people? They're in the regulatory agencies. They're in places like OFAC, which enforces sanctions. They're in all manner of places where oversight is really important in the government, internationally and nationally. And they thwart the new president. They sign an executive order to do this and watch it go down to that bureaucrat and watch him fail to carry out the executive order. That's what it's all about. So I've seen this before. As I mentioned to you earlier, Shirley Ann Warshaw, a political scientist at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, wrote a book called The Co-Presidency of Bush and Cheney, and she documents a lot of this. As I recall, there were some 1,800 positions in the government that Cheney thusly contaminated.
1,800.
1825, I believe, 1,825, if I remember correctly.
Goodness. Well, of course,
previous presidents might do a couple of hundred.
So your time in government might well have been sort of the germ of what the Republicans seem to be preparing to try and do.
I think it's a mistake to believe that Trump was an aberration to republicanism as republicanism exists today. He was an experiment, a failed experiment. I think most of the leadership that's somewhat intelligent would say that today, like McConnell, for example. But he was part of the warp and woof of the Republican Party, and we're going to see that again, whether it's DeSantis, a repeat of Trump, which I think is becoming very, very doubtful. DeSantis would be, my money would be on DeSantis right now, the current governor of Florida. But there could be someone else out there too. But rest assured, the danger with this new president, if it's Republican, will be that he'll be smarter than Trump.
If I can just diverge for a minute, why do you think it is much less likely that Trump will get back into power?
I think he's embroiled in so many problems, both legal and criminal, and his, if you will, followership is falling off to just the raw, bitter core, to the extent that I don't believe he could muster the people. I hope he is the candidate, because I'm convinced that anybody in the Democrats can beat him.
As I mentioned, the justification that would be used if this Schedule F were to be employed would be, as they would say, cleaning out the deep state. And I think it's unfortunate that that's a phrase that Trump and his people really seem to have co-opted, that if you ever use that phrase, you're like assumed to be some kind of conspiracy theorist or like Alex Jones or something.
Well, the term actually comes from Turkey, at least as scholars have written authoritatively on it. That's the first place you encounter it in the sort of vein that we now, no matter the interpretation we put on it, that vein is a part of that interpretation. Mike Lofgren picked up on that and wrote a book called The Deep State, and it became a term of art in this country, the United States. And as Mike will tell you, and I think he's right, we're not talking about the bureaucracy, the civil service in particular, so much, or the foreign service or the military. What we're really talking about is the oligarchs, the corporate billionaires, millionaires, and so forth, trillionaires. Now that's a reality. We're talking about those people. And that is very different from what the Republicans are trying to paint the deep state as. They don't want it to be that, because they are that. They are the political arm of that group. And so they don't want that to be revealed. They want to change the argument. But the deep state has never been the bureaucracy, as it were. The deep state is the people who really run this country. And that's not the bureaucracy.
I think, I can't remember who said it, but like the shadow of big business or something.
Yes, it's represented. If you've seen I'm not sure I agree with everything in the YouTube video that's out on BlackRock right now, but it's represented very vividly in that YouTube video on BlackRock. BlackRock doesn't own, as the video contends, 60%, 70% of the world, but it has its fingers in manipulating financially, banking wise, and so forth, 60, 70% of the world. So in that sense, the video is right. BlackRock is the deep state, and others like them, State, Vanguard.
Well, to bring it back to the Republicans, you said that you would prefer if Trump was the nominee because he likely wouldn't win. If it turns out, however, that the Democrats, presumably Joe Biden, do lose to whoever the Republican nominee is, wouldn't you consider DeSantis to be, as you said, a more intelligent and therefore a more dangerous version of Trump?
Absolutely. I think the soft coup d'etat would be complete then. The Republicans have every reason to believe they will win the House in the midterms, though not as decisively as I thought once, because they've really messed up on abortion and some other things. Really made women angry, for example. The vote in Kansas recently is proof positive of that. Kansas, of all places. But they've got the House, I think, in the midterms. The Senate, I would have said they would have, but it's looking dicey right now. They might not get the Senate, but put that aside for a moment. They still have a cloture-proof, business in the Senate where nothing can ever get passed of consequence. So for all practical purposes, they would then have the Congress, and they got the court. So the soft coup is complete if DeSantis is elected. They have the Supreme Court. They have the three branches of government. They have the Supreme Court, and they have it in a hole that I would never have thought, a hold, HOLD, that I would never have thought possible. Never have thought that the Supreme Court of the United States, even with the Taney Court and the Dred Scott decision and all the past mistakes, the Marshall Court even, which was very much an arrogant, power-hungry court. This is the worst ever. And this is the worst, not because it's arrogant and power hungry. It's because it's carrying out the Republican mandate. That's why it's so bad. So they'll have everything. The coup will be complete. And that's why I'm concerned. And as you said, they'll have a leader who's not stupid.
So is there any doubt in your mind that DeSantis would do exactly what the Trump campaign seemed to be planning?
Much smarter, I think. He'd be much smarter about it. We would have the beginning of a fascist state, Mussolini with a brain. Most Americans look at me and say, that can't happen in America. And I say, are you sure? Ever checked history out? Ever know how Italy fell to Mussolini? Ever know how Austria and Hitler and Germany came about? Ever know about any other point in history where a reasonably representative state, whether it was monarchical or whatever, or Roman or Greek, turned into a despotism? It happens all the time, dude. Oh, America's different. America's different. We're the exceptional nation. Yeah, we are the exceptional nation. We're exceptionally stupid. We have exceptionally bad health care. We are exceptionally derelict in our duty towards the budget and money in general. We're predatory capitalists. When we do make products, we make them in a monopoly, we make them shoddy, and we charge the maximum price for them. We're exceptional. Oh, and also we're Christian nationalists. We're exceptional. So
if something like this plan, this Schedule F, were to be carried out, surely, this whole class of bureaucrats and everything wouldn't just meekly accept their redundancy. Surely they would fight back to some degree.
You would think so, and you would think that the Democrats would, or at least some element of the Democrats would join in that fight. What
might that look like?
Well, what I mean by being smart instead of stupid, like Trump would do this all in one fell swoop. And you're right, it would invite all kinds of pushback and all kinds of objections, and might even be thwarted because of that. chaos would reign for a while inside the government. Not a good thing when we're facing climate change, no nuclear weapons treaties and so forth either. But I think what DeSantis would do is he would say, as the Republicans under Charles Koch's leadership and under others like Koch, Lewis Powell, for example, the Supreme Court justice that wrote the corporate letter that got all this started with the Koch brothers and so forth. I think they have this long-term view. And so it would be piecemeal, it would be incremental, it would just begin to happen, and things would not be so tumultuous that it would raise a major opposition. In fact, by the time a major opposition got its act together, it'd probably be a done deal. I think that's their plan. That's the smarter members of them's plan. Remember, Charles Koch's been working at this with billions of dollars for over 30 years. If you read Nancy's book, Democracy in Chains, you understand that the trove of archives that she stumbled on at George Mason University and based her book on tell you exactly what Charles Koch and the gang around him, and he built a really formidable gang of billionaires and millionaires and others to do their work. Their goal was to take over the country, but not in a day or a week or a year or a decade. It was to take 30 or 40 or 50 years. But at the end, they were going to be triumphant. And I have to say, they've had some significant defeats, but by and large, they appear to be triumphant. I would say, actually, that Trump was a defeat, that Trump derailed everything and alerted some people to the possibilities. And so now they've got to be careful. They got to be careful, but they're not going to deviate. They're not going to change their plan. They wish America to be a Christian corporatocracy that in all manner of governance looks like a fascist state. There are only a few scholars that are looking at this in a significant way, and there are quite a few that are pecking away at it, like Gedden at Johns Hopkins and others. But they're only showing a little bit of ankle, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There are very few, like Mike Lofgren, who've actually put the whole thing together and put out an article in a book that is lots of articles actually in a book that essentially describes it. But who's reading it and who cares? And by the way, there aren't 10 Americans out of 11 who have the brains to understand what Mike's talking about. Or I shouldn't say the brains so much as the brains and the willpower or desire to do anything about it. Because everyone's so, like in every civilization, everyone's so caught up in their own lives and trying to make ends meet, they don't have time to do it.
My question came back to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, given your familiarity with, I guess, the day-to-day workings of government, if for a moment we assume that I guess the worst, or maybe the second worst thing happens, that Trump gets back in and that he initiates this and it's successful, I mean, what does that look like? Does that lead to anything other than chaos within?
Well, as I said, I think it will with Trump. I think you're right about Trump. Trump will go after it whole hog right from the bat. I mean, the minute he's sworn in the second time, he'll go after it. That will, in fact, create a battle with much of the Congress, maybe even some of the Republicans, because one, the ones who want it to happen eventually don't want it to happen that fast, and they don't want to show their bona fides so early, and they'd be forced to. And I think the other side of the aisle, the Democrats and the independents like Angus King from Maine, would fight it tooth and nail. And Trump would be so precipitous in his actions and so eager to get it done and so arrogant about getting it done that I think he would create a formidable opposition. And what we'd have is a battle within the government. It's not a time, as I indicated earlier, for a battle within the government. We have some pretty formidable challenges out there. And I'm not even going to put China in that formidable challenge list because the others are existential, and China's just out there hanging around as a nation state that someone wants us to build a Cold War against so they can make a lot of money off of it. That's all the China business is about. But nuclear weapons scare me. They really frighten me. We have taken all the arms control away, and Putin's about ready to take the last remaining treaty, the New START treaty, which we just renewed, thank goodness, because it was going by the wayside too if Trump had anything to do with it. And Putin has essentially let it be known that, hey, you're not going to negotiate again. We're out of the treaty environment. Very dangerous. And then, of course, we got the climate crisis, which is bearing down on us like a freight train.
Would that kind of institutional paralysis, do you think, result in less American interaction with the rest of the world, or just in a far more erratic and probably dangerous way?
The latter, I think. Everyone that has been touched by us of late would hope for the former. As the Cubans said to me when Trump was elected, do you think anonymity would be our best posture? And I said, yes, probably, but he'll find you, because the little minions underneath him who hate you will get his attention, and he will see a prospect of victory, and he will hit you too. And he wound up doing that in about his third year in office. He wound up really cracking down on Cuba, stopping the flights and stopping the transfer of money from Cubans in Florida to Cuba proper. So yeah, anonymity is the best policy when you've got something like that going on. But
so people hoping for a paralyzed United States probably shouldn't be pinning their hopes on another Trump administration.
No, I don't think so. And people like Beijing and Moscow and probably Brasilia and maybe some other places, maybe even eventually Delhi, who are working behind the scenes or in front of the scenes, like the Chinese and the Russians, to develop an alternative to the dollar, are really, really going to salivate over this, because they're going to succeed. They're going to succeed. And we're going to wake up in this country one day. Charles de Gaulle once said, the most pernicious weapon the Americans wield is the power of their currency. He was right. And we're going to wake up one day and it's going to be gone. And our debt is going to go through the roof, because we'll no longer be able to denominate oil sales and other things in dollars, and therefore depress our debt.
So this is probably a bit of a convoluted question, but is there kind of an emerging divide among US institutions? I'm thinking particularly of, like, in the armed forces and the intelligence community, that lean more towards one party than the other. If there is, how might that sort of play out in the longer term?
Well, there's always been an inclination to lean towards the Republicans for money purposes, because the Republicans don't even ask, and they plus up your budget. But the Democrats have become very good at that too of late. And so that's not the power that it was in the past over influencing the military, though it's still there. It's still there. The other one that worries me is nothing to do with this except ancillarily, and that's Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is rampant in the armed forces at every rank, including 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. And this brings with it this movement that DeSantis is a part of, that Trump was a part of, is a part of, wants Christianity to be the national religion. And they want the military to enforce that. I know that sounds crazy, especially in the beginning of this new century, which is now a quarter out of the way almost. But it is a purpose of sects like the Dominionists and so forth, and they have infiltrated the military. They're in missile silos that have nuclear weapons in them. They're on ships. They're flying airplanes. They hold Christmas in August celebrations, for example, and force all the troops to come to them and proselytize in those functions, using the power of the chain of command to convince troops to become Christians. And not just Christians like I understand Christians, and maybe you do, but their version of Christianity, which is a Christ rampant with a sword in his hand, striking down all the unbelievers. And this is what they want the American military to do. So they want Christianity to become the national religion, the military to become its arm of enforcement. And that goes right in there with the idea of a fascist state. Didn't think any of this stuff existed, did you?
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister that we've just gotten rid of in Australia was I guess, kind of a little bit like that. He was a Pentecostalist, so which is, I mean, that's very unusual for a country like Australia. So, but I mean, nothing to that extent, really. Would you say that Christian nationalism and white supremacy are interchangeable, or are they more
Go hand in
overlapping?
glove. Hand in glove. I'm not saying every Christian nationalist is a racist or vice versa, but they go hand in glove. I've written on the what I call the fourth or the fifth great awakening. We've had these things before in our history, of course. There are probably right now about 100 million evangelical Christians in America. That's 1/3 of our population. Of that 100 million, only about 40 to 45 million are in this category I'm describing. The others are very attentive to the environment. They are genuine Christians. They believe Christ threw the moneylenders out of the temple for a reason. they are decent, God-fearing, to use the phrase, Christians. And I have nothing against them. Practice your Christianity the way Christ taught it. That's great. Love is the template of Christ's teachings, really. It's these others that are militant. They're Christians militant. They're the ones who in Salem, Massachusetts, burned witches, for example. We've always had them with us, but we've never had the numbers and had those numbers have the power politically and otherwise, wealth-wise, that they do today.
I mean, it almost sounds like a question too ridiculous to ask, but do you think it's possible there could be witch burnings again in the United States?
The equivalent, I have no doubt that people will go to prison and go to solitary confinement and so forth in some of our absolutely atrocious prisons under these governments, myself included, were they to do it in time. People like me, they want to put in jail and stay in jail forever.
Well, I think I've probably already got the answer to this question, but I was going to refer to that article or letter that 3 generals wrote. I think it was the beginning of last year, but basically saying that, the likelihood is that at the next presidential election that there will be an attempted military coup. Is that something that you agree with, or perhaps not that dramatic?
To me, I have to caveat this with, I retired from military service, active military service in 1997, a long time ago. Now I've been trying to keep abreast of everything on a almost monthly basis ever since. I've just written an article, for example, with Major General H about the failure of the all volunteer force. It's collapsing even as we look at it because they can't find recruits. And they're bribing now young 18-year-olds with $50,000 bonuses just to sign up. You go to West Virginia, find some young kid who just graduated from high school and put $50,000 in cash in his hand and tell him, that's the most money he's ever seen in his life, or she. But it's not working. It's not working. We're going to be well short of recruiting goals this year. So what worries me more than anything else is chaos within the military rather than a designed coup or a designed help for a coup, because you have so many different factions. And as General Milley, I think, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, more or less sort of said during the Trump administration's last year, I'm not sure where it would go. I'm not either. You probably have fighting even within the ranks of the military if it really got bad, but it'd be hard to get that entity as an entity of lethal force for the state, I think, to act in concert with some fascist takeover. I think you'd have a hard time with that.
So what do you think can really be done to prevent or mitigate these threats? Is there anything that you think can be realistically done, or is it just
very powerful that can be done? The American people need to get out and vote, and they need to vote non-Republican everywhere. I don't care where it is. I don't care what office it is. I don't care where, county, state, national. Don't vote Republican. Teach them tell them that the American people are still content with democracy. They do not want fascism. They do not want autocracy. They do not want a king, be he Trump or DeSantis, and vote them out of office, resoundingly so. And don't even worry about the qualifications of the opponent. Just the fact he's not or she's not a Republican is qualification.
So I remember you saying at some point in the past, you identified yourself politically as a Republican. I imagine that's probably not how you would describe yourself anymore.
No, I still do, because I describe myself as an Eisenhower Lincoln Republican, and I lament and long for the party of Eisenhower and Lincoln. It was a pretty decent party. I know its lineage. I know from whence it came. I know why it came. I know what we did, for example, as clouded as it was with misdirection and finality in the Civil War. What we did to assist Lincoln in winning that war. It was very important. We've just morphed into something different, and I'd like to see it change. If not see it change, see it replaced. Can't get a third party off the ground in this country, though. That's been more or less demonstrated in the last 200-300 years. You can change parties. I mean, we went from Whigs to this, war Democrats to peace Democrats. We've had manifestations of third parties, if you will, that more or less grew out of an existing party. I'd like to see that happen if that's the only thing that can happen in the Republican Party. I'd like to see people like apparently now Liz Cheney. I never thought I'd say this, but people like she who would reclaim the Republican Party for positive purposes rather than these, we want to be an autocracy and we want to rule everybody purposes.
And hasten the arrival of Judgment Day or something.
Well, whatever. I hate to put it in that kind of language because I'm not that strongly religious in that sense, but I think, we're all going to die and we're all going to go to dust and ashes. If there's a supernatural being somewhere, they have a really awkward sense of humor.
So I suppose, like as a professor, do you see like historical parallels to former great powers and even empires, and see the United States going down the same road? Does that make you think it's just inevitable?
I gave a talk at Dartmouth about 2 years ago where I tried to outline what I thought the future was. And first thing I pointed out was that we are not just an empire. We are probably the most powerful empire in human history, at least 5,000 years or so that I can look at. Rome had not the sway that we have. Rome had not the territory that we have. Rome might have split into two different, the West and the East survived for quite some time. It wasn't quite as catastrophic as the barbarians at the gate metaphor makes it look sometime. But no one, I think, in human history, no state has been as powerful as we. No king either. Not Tamerlane, not Genghis Khan. No one's been as powerful as we. We touch Powell used to say this, we touch every single person in the world with our power. And then he would sit down and he would start to describe how that worked, whether it was, Iowa pigs or Iowa wheat going to Eritrea, or where the military was at that moment. We have 750 bases in the world. The rest of the world combined, including Russia and China, has less than 80. We have 750. That is empire. Question I asked at Dartmouth is, how does this empire go down? Because it is assuredly going down. History alone tells us that will happen. Entropy, atrophy, whatever you want to call it. History says we're going down. There's two ways to go down: catastrophic and non-catastrophic. There are a number of ways underneath catastrophic, military, bombs, whatever. And then there's only one or two ways under non-catastrophic. And I use the British Empire to demonstrate that you can find off-ramps. From 1890, when we really were the economic power in the world, not Britain, to 1956, when Suez happened and the British really understood that they were, as Jeremy Greenstock told me recently, just a middling power. Yeah, I thought that was a little bit too much, but just a middling power. Maybe it isn't. That was a long time. And it was a time that allowed, not purposefully, so to speak, but the ravages of time, if you will, to work on the British Empire and to replace it with us. Do we have someone like that today? I think not. I think at best what we have today following us will be a consortium, and it will consist of countries like the BRICS, maybe Russia, at some sort of almost hegemonic position, maybe China, but I think it'll be more or less peer powers. It'll be powers inter pares rather than primus inter pares. And what we need to do is find that off-ramp that takes us into pares, into near equals with several other powers in the world. Several other powers in the world who work together. I call this comedy, collaboration, and cooperation, the 3 C's, in order to meet the crisis of the climate, because otherwise this planet's going to cast us off, just as it did the dinosaurs. The Earth will be here 4.5 billion years from now, my science friends tell me. It'll burn out in the sun, but we won't. We simply won't. We'll be gone, just like the dinosaurs. That is a distinct possibility, and we will have done it to ourselves. As one scientist said to me, we are the first generation in 5,000 years, as far as I know, to have the technology and know-how to save ourselves. The question is, do we have the wisdom to use it? And it's increasingly looking like, in America at least, we don't have that wisdom. But that's another matter. But that is a way to lose the empire too, of course, a very drastic way to lose it. But I'd like to see the way that I described to the Dartmouth students, an off-ramp, take it carefully, divest ourselves of this idea that we're going to be the hegemon of the world, and began to cooperate and collaborate with the other powers in the world that need to work with us in order to meet the crises, the nuclear weapons crisis, and also the climate crisis. Nuclear weapons, we need multilateral treaties, not just Moscow, Washington. We got 9 nuclear weapon states now, including North Korea and Israel. And if we have to bring Israel in kicking and screaming, so be it. You know, they have to be in these arms control regimes, because we've proven, I think, in the last 70 years, that's really the only way. It's not perfect, but it's the only way to keep a reasonable hand on these very deadly weapons, which could also destroy us, destroy the planet too.
I was going to say, so then would you presumably reject the characterization that much of the media has made of Trump and his ilk as being isolationist or non-interventionist?
Look at what they did. I'm talking to my military friends about this almost weekly. You know, they're finally coming around to the realization that Trump lied. He lied about, you know, that Iraq war was stupid, you know, and then he sends 52 cruise missiles into Syria. You could say, as some of my friends in uniform do, well, that was the bureaucracy. They got him. That was, do you mean you got him? You're wearing a uniform, dude. Do you mean the military got Trump and got him to do that? No. I mean Raytheon, who makes those cruise missiles at $2 million a piece. They got him. Well, I'm sorry. Look at Trump's language and then look at his actions. He was just as bad as any other president in terms assassination of Soleimani. That set a precedent. That set a precedent we will rue in the future, because we are the most vulnerable nation on the face of the earth to that sort of thing. Someone assassinating our leaders. We're as vulnerable as anyone, perhaps more so. Not a good precedent to set. You don't go in and assassinate someone who is an official member of a UN recognized nation state. And now we not only do that, we're talking about declaring Russia a nation state of long-standing, a state sponsor of terrorism. You know, I mean, we're insane. We're insane. These kind of things are going to come back on us with a vengeance. And it's just a matter of time.
I mean, I am veering from the topic quite a lot, but in terms of the retaliation for the Soleimani assassination, is that what you think will ultimately happen? That some high American leader, official, whoever, will be disposed of in a similar way?
If it were the Persians who did it, the Iranians, no, it'd be far more subtle than that. It would be unexpected, and it would be in an entirely different area. What I'm referring to is the precedent being set. Putin's already shown, for example, that he has no compunction about sending nuclear pellets to people he doesn't like and killing them, or dispatching an assassin to kill them. Putin gets angry enough at someone in this country that he thinks has particularly got his hand in anti-Russia activities. What's to stop him? And this idea that the Secret Service, now a basket case of its former self, falling apart even as I speak. I had a conversation with two agents the other day. My daughter and my daughter's husband were Secret Service agents. They don't even recognize the organization anymore. It's incompetent. It's utterly incompetent. What happened with Trump, of course, is many of the good people fled. And so you replace them with not necessarily good people. So it would not be hard for Putin to exact his revenge on anyone in this country that he wanted to exact his revenge on, or Xi Jinping too, for that matter. And we laid the precedent down. We said, oh, look, we used a drone and killed Soleimani. Very efficient operation, got rid of him. Maybe we ought to do that to a couple of Americans and see how that sets with them. I mean, it's just a matter of time, I think, until something like that happens. And by the way, the technology that is going to support this fascist state is so obvious right now. And I'm scared to death of what isn't obvious, but is out there. From AI to RPAs, remotely piloted aircraft drones. Just the other day, a local police department in America acquired a complement of drones. And in their conversation amongst their officers about the purpose of these drones, it came up that, wouldn't it be nice if we were chasing a high-speed car down the highway or whatever, and the perp got out of his car or made himself available, we had an armed drone and we could pop him? That's just, that's just a few years away, that we have armed drones overhead in America. And it's not the military flying them or the CIA flying them, as it was when they got Ayman al-Zawahiri in Afghanistan recently. It's the local police department. And oh, by the way, you come out of the 7-Eleven, you've just robbed the 7-Eleven, they don't want to come down and get you, so pop you. Bing. What better way to get rid of your enemies? I mean, we've got the technology for this fascist state to be as powerful, if not more so, than any that's ever developed in human history.
So do you then have and maybe your family as well, like almost, I suppose, an escape plan for if and when such a thing happens?
I have an escape plan, the grave. My wife passed away in November. Thank God she's not here to see some of this stuff. In that sense, I really miss her, but in many respects, I wish I had preceded her. And my grandchildren and my children are in positions where they can probably take care of themselves, at least for a while. But I worry about it. I worry about their future. I don't worry about my future. If I dropped dead tomorrow, it wouldn't trouble me much.
Oh, I think I was going to diverge just a little bit more, just because I've got you. Like, it would be interesting to see what you make of the situation in Europe with the whole gas crisis.
I got to run in 5 minutes.
You have to run in 5 minutes. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, I mean, I don't know if 5 minutes will be enough, but what you see happening in the long term with Europe and the gas crisis, particularly with Germany.
I think we've done something here in Ukraine, Putin, 24 February invasion, but we motivated that invasion by the expansion of NATO, as Professor John Mearsheimer has shown very vividly. I think what we're seeing happen, I'm gonna walk out on a diving board over a big pool here. But I think what we see happening right now is the negation of NATO. The euphoria would have it otherwise. Finland, Sweden, you know, all these new 32 members now, I guess. Remember, an attack on one's an attack on all. As soon as that Iowa farmer wakes up one morning and understands that he's risking nuclear war for Montenegro, for Estonia, for Lithuania, that's the end. But it will not come about in that sort of democratic way, I don't think. It's going to come out because when this is over, and it must be over sometime. Now, there are defense contractors and others who want to keep Ukraine going forever. That's the main motivation for the war right now, is billions of dollars are being made on both sides. I shouldn't say both sides, three sides. Ukraine, who was the third largest arms dealer in the world, next to Russia and the United States before the war broke out. Russia and the United States. We're making a fortune, and Russia's making a fortune off the petroleum, and so is Saudi Arabia. Biden's trip was a farce. MBS essentially told him, go away, I don't need you. So we're looking at a situation that when it does stop, everyone's going to look around and say, why did we do this? And why do we even have NATO? We Europeans should be responsible for our own security. My God, we've been trying for 30 years under the various acronyms, European Security Identity. I was there for almost all of them. We've never succeeded. And the argument of the United States has always been, oh no, if you put those forces in a European security architecture, they won't be available to NATO. And the Europeans have always said, oh no, they will, unless they're in a crisis. And we've said, yeah, but that's the issue. There might be a crisis and we can't call on them. Oh, okay. Well, that's going to end. And a new generation of European leaders is going to look around and say, why do we even have this damn organization? And oh, by the way, Russia's a part of Europe. Look at your map, Rand McNally, whatever. Russia's a part of Europe, at least from the Urals in. We just fought a war with Russia, or a reasonable facsimile thereof. This is crazy. We need to be Europe, and we need to be responsible for our own security. That country over there on the other side of the ocean, it's Fascism now anyway. I'm not sure we will. There are just so many divergences that are going to be realized come end of Ukraine. Ukraine has given everybody this euphoric, Christians, white people. These aren't Yemenis. These aren't Syrians. These are Christians. Let's be for them.
We should care more about them.
Yeah, exactly. We care more about them. So it'll end. It'll end, and I think it's going to end dramatically. It's going to end with the Europeans standing up and taking over their own lives. They're going to get sick of our hegemony.
Well, I mean, it's been a very dramatic conversation, but unfortunately, as much as
where will Australia? Where will Australia go? And New Zealand? That's a huge
I can't really see us striking out on our own, but who knows?
I was the Australian desk officer at Pacific Command, Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea in 1984. And all Australia was worried about was Indonesia and the hordes coming down across the northern part of Australia. And now after East Timor and the other things that have happened, the Australians seem to be more worried about China. So that puts them in the US bailiwick more solidly. But that's going to change too, I think. And it's going to change when Xi Jinping is gone, I think. I mean, that's my reading of the tea leaves in Beijing. Anyway.
Well, that's a whole other episode. So hopefully that can happen at some point. But yeah, it's been really, really fascinating to get your insights on all of these very important questions. So thank you very much for making the time.
Really. Take care.